Welcome to the Humanities 197, the Art and Science of Happiness Guest Faculty Lectures series. This year's theme for the Humanities Alliance is Works of Love, finding meaning and connection in the age of AI. Today we are fortunate to have with us Marla Simpson. Marla Simpson has been a member of our psychology department since 2016. She holds a BA from the University of Washington and an MA from San Francisco State University, where she was awarded the Distinguished Achievement Award. Marla's talk today is, Does Learning Still Matter? Would you please give Marla a warm welcome?
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to be approaching this topic from the cognitive perspective because I'm a psychology instructor, and so this is in my bailiwick. The topic is, does human learning still matter? And so I just want to start with a spoiler alert in case any of you were wondering what the big takeaway would be. Yes, it does still matter. Were there any of you who are waiting to find out? Leaving the room now? No, probably not. Okay, so intuitively we know that learning still matters, but I've had some colleagues wondering, what should we do? How should we think about these latest developments in AI? Does this mean, is this just another calculator, just another tool for learning? Should we be teaching English as if students will be always using this tool? These are some of the questions I've heard from colleagues on campus that really made me think about, well, what is it about human learning that I know, as from a cognitive perspective, that might inform these questions, okay? I'm also going to ask that we save big questions maybe for the end so that I can get through my presentation, but I do some things when I lecture that I'm gonna ask you to play along with. So one of the things I do is I will periodically say, put up your fingers to show me how well you understand. 10 means, yeah, I got it completely. 1 means, I'm not there, could you explain some more? So I'll periodically ask that. Another thing I do is I have mini quizzes in my lecture. So we'll have a multiple choice quiz and everyone is going to participate. And I don't care whether you get the right answer or not because just participating will help you learn. And there will be, for example, let's say there are 4 choices. You have fingers, right? So you're going to, on the count of 3, put up maybe your choice is number 2. We'll go 1, 2, 3, and all together you will choose 2. And I can look out and I can see whether you guys agree with me, okay? So we're gonna have those things going on and just wanted you guys, let's have one quick practice. We're gonna go 1, 2, 3, and everyone's gonna choose a finger number, any finger number. Ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, okay, great. We're already off to a fantastic start. Okay, topics I'm going to cover today. We're going to talk about memory. We're going to talk about cognitive load, cognitive offloading. We'll talk about student AI use, and I will end in talking about what's at stake. So first, in psychology, we have actually a definition that we use in my textbook for memory. Memory is the persistence of learning over time through encoding, storage, and retrieval of information. All right, fair enough, okay? So it does it does require that we have that information in our heads, in our own minds. So when we talk about memory from a biological point of view, it's really important to understand that our brains are not Bluetooth devices. Our brains do not receive information the same way a computer does. And in fact, they're much, much slower. What's required at the biological level are synaptic connections to be made and reinforced. And if we're talking about academic learning, this usually requires repetition of that thought to reinforce the synaptic connections. Recent research pegged the speed at which we process cognitive information. This is different than sensory information like light or sound. cognitive information, how quickly we process cognitive information, that rate is 10 bits per second. Okay? So just to put that 10 bits perspective in 10 bits per second in perspective, an old, outdated dial-up connection transfers information at a rate of 50,000 bits per second. A modern Wi-Fi transfers information at a rate of 100 million bits per second. So we are pretty slow compared to a computer. But let's look at what 10 bits per second actually looks like. If I can get. I want you to watch for the time before the blindfold goes down, because that's the cognitive processing. All right, that's what 10 bits per second looks like. Slow, right? Impressive, but slow. Not a computer, okay? So it's time for our first mini quiz here. Really quickly, make sure you're all paying attention, keep anybody from falling asleep. The rate at which humans process information and make decisions is 1, the same rate as a modern cell phone processes information, 2, 50,000 bits per second, 3, slower than an old dial-up internet connection, and 4, 100 bits per second. Everybody together, 1, 2, 3. I see lots of 3s out there, which shows me everyone's paying attention. That's fantastic. Okay. We're going to do a quick little demonstration here, experiment here with pennies. How many of you think you know what a penny looks like? Raise your hands if you think you know what a penny looks like. Okay. How many don't think you know what a penny looks like? Okay, good. All right, you guys don't have to play along. Those of you who think you know what a penny looks like, who have held one in your hand and been familiar with these, this is a game for all of you. What I'd like you to do is I would like you to examine this grid and find the correct penny. Find the correct penny, okay. And write that down. Write down your answer. I'll give you guys a minute here. And you can use the letters on the left and the numbers on the top to write down your answer. Okay, how many people need a little more time? Okay, all right, how many of you chose a penny in column A? Okay, how many chose a penny in column B? Okay, how many chose a penny in column C? Okay, those of you who chose a penny in column C, how many chose 1? How many chose 2? How many chose 3? How many chose 4? And how many chose 5? Okay, those of you who chose 2, raise your hands again. These guys know what a penny looks like. All right, so this is something that we have had, most of us have had a lot of contact with a penny. We think we know what it looks like. But we have never really thought deeply about what the characteristics are of that penny. Often, we think we know things if they're familiar. A penny is familiar. So we think we know it, but we haven't thought deeply enough about it to commit the details of it to our memory. And this goes for academic subjects as well. This is why simply scanning your textbook over and over and over again is an inefficient study strategy, because you don't think deeply about the content, but you become familiar and you think you know it, okay? So this is also brings us to, well, how does information get into our memory? Well, among cognitive scientists, there's a pretty broad consensus about some things that have to do with how information gets into our memory. One of the first things is that it requires effort. Some terms that you'll hear in the literature are desirable difficulties in the education literature, or friction. What that means is sometimes when you're struggling and you're frustrated and you don't quite think you're understanding yet, you are doing your best thinking. You are on the path to understanding, and understanding in a deep way, okay? It requires attention. So dividing your attention, trying to do several different tasks at once, answering your phone when it pops up, that is going to interfere with your studying as well. And it's enhanced when it can build on prior knowledge. This one's a really interesting one and important one for us today. Thinking about Tommy Cherry, the Rubik's Cube we just watched, how many of you think this was his first time he ever solved a Rubik's Cube? Good, no one believes that. So how does he come to do it? He processed all of that information from that cube very, very rapidly, not because he was remembering every detail of that cube, but because he probably, I have not asked him, but most likely he had committed patterns to memory. He had committed aspects of that puzzle to memory. And once he identified those aspects, he could draw on those and only had to remember pattern 1 plus pattern 2 plus pattern 3 type of thinking instead, okay? So he built on, so he could process that information very quickly because of not because of his working memory, which is limited, but because of the prior knowledge he had stored in his long-term memory, okay? So this brings me to the topic of working memory. Working memory is sort of that buffer of memory, that memory that we use sometimes. Often working memory and short-term memory are used sort of simultaneously as a kind of the intake of the memory we use when we're taking in new information. We often do combine it with existing and prior knowledge, but this is our working memory, our memory when we're addressing these. And it's fairly limited. Short-term memory is 7 plus or minus 2 items. So those of you who've taken psychology will be familiar with the magic number 7. So because our working memory is so limited, if we get too much, we can think about how much can go in there at one time. And that amount that can go in there at one time is the cognitive load. And the more we try to put in there at the same time, the more difficult a problem is going to be for us. So if we increase the cognitive load, it's going to be harder to solve a problem. If we decrease the cognitive load, we'll have more space in our working memory to address whatever the immediate memory task is. I see some people looking quizzical. How many of you are understanding so far? Let's see, fingers for how well you're understanding. All right, okay, good. Okay, so this also gives us this important relationship between prior knowledge and cognitive load that was so well illustrated with Tommy Cherry, right? So prior knowledge scaffolds the intake of new information. It makes it easier to learn if you already know something. I often use the example with my psychology students that it's probably a whole lot easier for me to learn a new psychology concept than for them, because I've got some foundation of lots of psychology concepts, things I'm connecting it to in my mind. It has a place that it has something to hook onto. Okay. So when we use this word scaffolding, this is also used in psychology and in education literature. Scaffolding provides assistance. So it can be, we can scaffold a task by making parts of it easier once a person understands that, moving more and more greater and greater levels of difficulty. So that would be an example of scaffolding. So if we have prior knowledge already, then we've made it easier for the new cognitive task to be processed, okay? I'm going to do another quick demo with all of you. Anyone in here speak a Scandinavian language or understand a Scandinavian language? Okay. All right. I'm going to say some words in Norwegian. I'm going to say them in a series, not super fast, but somewhat fast. And I want you to try to pay attention because I'm going to ask you a couple questions afterwards. Okay. En, to, tre, fire, fem, sex, syv, åtte. Okay. Did I say ni? Raise your hand if you think I said ni. Did I say ti? Raise your hand if you think I said ti. Did I say siv? Raise your hand if you think I said siv. I did. Good. Very good. About half the class didn't get that. Okay. Let's try again in a different language. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Did I say the word 9? Did I say the word 10? Did I say the word 7? Y'all got that one right. Big difference, right? Why? Why is that one so easy? You know your numbers. These aren't new sounds to you. These aren't new words to you. You know this series. You know that if I say 1 through 8, I didn't say 9. Okay? So this is that same example, another example of how our prior knowledge makes it easier to remember a new thing that I just tried to teach you, which were 8 Norwegian numbers. Okay? Let's do another quick mini quiz here. Emmett is trying to learn Russian using an app on his phone. First, he learned some basic greetings and basic grammar. Gradually, he's been increasing his vocabulary and expanding his use of grammar. In this case, the app is providing blank for learning Russian. 1, cognitive load. 2, similarity. 3, scaffolding. And 4, working memory. On 3, let's do it all together. 1, 2, 3. And I see lots of 3s. That tells me you're all paying attention. Fantastic. Okay, let's keep building on this idea of prior knowledge and what prior knowledge gives us relative to our own thinking. Prior knowledge is not just critical for identifying sounds in a string of numbers in Norwegian, but it is also important for scaffolding critical thinking. There have been efforts to teach critical thinking separately from content knowledge, and it turns out that we need content knowledge in addition to critical thinking training skills. So what I mean by critical thinking, and the scholar that I like best for this topic is Daniel Willingham. He's done a lot of work on cognitive psychology and educational psychology. And he views critical thinking, he identified 3 characteristics that we tend to associate with critical thinking. When we think about those critical thinking tasks, we want people to learn that critical thinking is novel, that it is self-directed, and that it's effective, that you can come up with an effective answer to this, okay? So just so we have a framework for thinking about what we're talking about here relative to critical thinking. So studies of critical thinking show that it tends to be domain specific or at least influenced by the content. Learning Latin does not help you solve math problems better. Okay? Now I heard some of you chuckle, but there were times when we thought, well, if you learn math, this will transfer over into these other domains, or if you learn Latin, this will make you a better critical thinker generally. And that general critical thinking skill will then be transferable if you come take a psychology class with me. Okay? So studies of critical thinking show that domain knowledge helps us solve novel problems. So what that means is if you know something about psychology, you're in a better position to solve problems that have to do with psychology. And critical thinking skills develop best when the subject matter content is introduced along with those teaching skills. So, yes. So novel would be a problem that you hadn't seen that specific problem before. You might have seen problems like it, but you hadn't seen that multiple choice test question before. It's a new problem has different characteristics, but may have some similarities to the novel, to the previous. Okay? All right. So this is another way that we see that scaffolding is really important to learning. Having some prior knowledge, not just to learning discrete things, but to learning, to applying critical thinking skills. Okay. So this far into the presentation, I haven't really mentioned AI. Let's start talking about technology for a minute. If you look at, because of these different memory, we've talked about the limitations of our working memory. So because of the limitations on our working memory, we've developed technologies to help free up our cognitive capacity. So the idea is then if there's some portion of this you don't have to use your working memory on, then you can devote some of that capacity, more of that capacity to other things, other cognitive challenges, other cognitive tasks. And actually, at the most basic level, our written language is a form of technology that helps us manage these cognitive load limitations. We write to-do lists to remind us, oh, okay, I have to get that at the store, so that we don't need to use memory resources to remember that. We use calculators once we know our basic computational skills. We use calculators to free up some of the time that it would take to do long math to determine addition problem, for example. We use spreadsheets and statistical software. These are all tools that we use that help us manage our own cognitive load limitations and maybe do higher order tasks, okay? So these tools actually allow us to offload cognition. So we're taking that cognition that humans had done and we're transferring that, we're offloading that to the device, to the technology, okay? And the goal is to free up capacity in working memory. So these are all forms of cognitive offloading. And they reduce the amount of cognition needed for a particular task. All right, another quick mini quiz for you. If I can get this to go. Okay, considering the relationship between cognitive load and performance on a cognitive task, this one's a little harder, so it's likely that blank. 1, performance on a cognitive task would increase if the cognitive load required to complete the task increased. Performance would increase for cognitive tasks when a person has prior knowledge related to the task. And 3, performance would stay the same regardless of either increases or decreases in the complexity of a cognitive task. And 4, prior knowledge would not have any impact on cognitive performance. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so the answer is 2. Performance would increase for cognitive tasks where you have prior knowledge. Okay. All right, how well are you guys following me so far? Fingers, all right, I see lots of 10s, good, okay. Okay, so that's wonderful for completing these cognitive tasks, but it is important to recognize that there are trade-offs. Cognitive offloading tends to diminish the human capacity for the original task. Okay, so here are some examples. People no longer memorize phone numbers. A friend of my mother's, when I was growing up, you could tell her a phone number once, and she would literally remember it forever. She had been a switchboard operator before, and she could literally remember. These numbers she had some other way of remembering them. Now, I don't even know if my spouse knows my phone number. He manages to call me, but I don't know if he knows the number. Okay. They've done studies of people using spell checkers. We all use spell checkers, right? I think of spell checker as the word, the transformation like the calculator for written word, right? Because when they first arrived, boy, were those helpful. We used to have to look up words using a dictionary, a literal dictionary. Get it out, look up the words, check the spelling. So spell checkers, they've done studies. The hope was that people would get better at spelling because the spell checkers show you what the correct spelling was. You see that over and over again. They've done studies of people with either the spell checker on or the spell checker off. And they are better spellers with the spell checker off, because when the spell checker is on, they just assume it's right and click through. Yes?
We'll give people these crutches and it'll help them walk better.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so another example, autopilot for airline pilots. Fantastic, great thing to have, automates all of these things that have to do with complex tasks of getting planes up in the air, keeping them in the air and bringing them down. People have become dependent on these in ways that have become problematic, and there have been a number of crashes associated with autopilot errors, either various kinds of autopilot errors. GPS errors, 2,000 car crashes per year are due to GPS errors, okay? People are counting on the GPS and it drives you right off a broken road. Okay, so again, cognitive offloading has an impact on our ability to perform the original task. Now I'm going to get to, finally, cognitive offloading and AI. So in this case, I want to be a little bit specific about AI, because what we're talking about, AI is actually a really broad term. It's been used for a really long time for a lot of different things. When we talk about AI right now in an academic environment, it's the new thing that we are generally talking about. And by that I mean large language models, so LLM, generative AI. ChatGPT is the best known example, but there are others like Anthropic, Gemini. These are all LLM generative AI. How many of you guys have heard of LLM generative AI before? Okay. And how many of you know the basic business of what it's doing when it pumps out content? Very few of you. Okay, let me then explain briefly that what it's producing, what the LLM generative AI, the kinds of tools that I've just mentioned, these are calculating the probability of the next word. They are guessing the next word that will be in a sentence based on their corpus or their learning data, right? So they have a massive database of prior content, and based on that prior content, they are calculating, well, I think this is the word that you're going to want next after that one. Okay, with some algorithmic tweaks, so it doesn't always come up the same way, okay? But that's what it is. It isn't inventing anything. It's drawing from the existing database of knowledge. And it's a massive database, the training data. So it's learning from that training data, okay? So when we talk about cognitive offloading in AI, I want to be really specific. So I'm borrowing a definition from Michael Gerlich from his article, AI Tools in Society. So cognitive offloading through AI involves delegating tasks such as memory retention, decision making, and information retrieval to external systems. Okay. Think back for a moment to our definition of memory. And think about how much overlap we have with this definition here right now. Okay? So there are some differences between generative AI, LLM, ChatGPT, and other tools that we've used for cognitive offloading, such as a calculator. So one really big and really important difference is that a calculator is accurate, right? When we use a calculator, we know that if we type in 2 + 2, we're going to get 4. The answer is a known answer. It can be verified, it can be checked. We are used to using computers that are accurate for giving us information. And that's actually been a bit of a problem because sometimes if people are used to computers giving them accurate information, and now you invent a tool that doesn't produce, that does word probabilities based on training data, it's not going to be accurate. And in fact, it's not. It's often very inaccurate at guessing what you wanted to say in that sentence or what makes sense in that stream of text. Okay? So that's a really big difference. Another difference is that the other tools I mentioned are typically used to replace procedures when users have prior knowledge. So we don't start elementary school kids out with a calculator. We start them out with addition. And only when they understand that what they're typing in represents addition do we switch over to the calculator. Okay? We don't use it to replace learning addition. We use it to augment learning addition. That's a big difference as well. And then finally, the scope of what a tool like ChatGPT does, it answers questions in all kinds of different domains. So it's a broader scope than any of these previous tools that we've used as well. Which brings me to thinking really about some of these trade-offs. But first, I want to just ask you to consider AI, and again, this LLM, generative AI, in the context of how it's being used right now in industry, because this is a big question. We know that students are using it, but what is this role here in our classrooms what is the relationship between our use and use in the kinds of jobs that you might have in the future, the kinds of world that you might live in, where this might be applicable. So it is worth considering how it's being used in those domains. When I look at the literature about AI use in various domains like medicine and other domains, a lot of that discussion turns out to be theoretical. They are projecting that someday it's going to do this and that someday it's going to, and frankly, some of them seem a little bit ridiculous to me. No, it is not going to solve climate change. It is not going to, it's not going to cure cancer. It's going to give you words and information, and if you're really good at curing cancer, maybe you can make use of those, but it isn't going to do that. That's really important to understand, okay? Leaving aside the theoretical benefits, what might someday come from AI, because I think there are a lot of questions about what the future may hold, and when we start speculating, there's really no point of agreement, right? Because we're all just guessing. But we can look at how it's being used so far. So if we look at how it's being used so far in industry, what you see is a lot of hype and a lot of fear of missing out, a lot of companies that are trying to implement this with actually very mixed results. When I've looked for companies, examples, I've searched for this, examples of companies that have actually saved money, not that are projecting that they will save money, but have actually saved money using AI, it's actually pretty limited, surprisingly limited. Now there are a few reasons for that. Some of us who've worked in industry before know that most of the time when you're writing to your colleague about something that's totally inside baseball, right? It's like, okay, I'm writing about the meeting we had Thursday, and I'm reflecting, I'm giving you my opinion on that document. No, there's no previous training data for that, okay? So a lot of the writing that we do in a business setting, for example, is necessarily original and customized to the organization that you're working in. So that's a lot harder to draw from a corpus to get those, to use that. That's a lot different than an assignment that we might give in class. Okay. So the substantive use cases are pretty limited. One of the major hurdles is inaccurate information. Another is privacy. A number of organizations have prohibited it because they don't want that information being passed on to the AI companies because it's proprietary information, okay? But I did find a recent report, a McKinsey report, that shows from the respondents in this study, shows the adoption of AI for functions in these organizations. And what you see is about 72% in 2024 had used, and we're talking probably about, adopted AI is pretty broad, most likely trying to find some use for generative AI. And 72% reported they'd use it for one or more function that they'd integrated into in one or more function. 50% two or more functions, 27% three or more functions, and it goes down to where you get to 5 functions, really like 8% that had used it. So that's actually considering how much of exposure and enthusiasm there has been about AI. I don't know if I consider that all that impactful yet. That doesn't look to be changing the way people do business yet all that much. Okay. How well are you guys understanding? Fingers? Good. All right. Okay. So quick mini quiz. Which cognitive outcome has been linked to heavy reliance on automated technology? 1, more kids need to use glasses. Automated technology. 2, drivers have crashed because of over-reliance on GPS. And 3, IQ has increased. 1, 2, 3. All right, I see lots of 2s. You're all paying attention. That's fantastic. Okay, now I want to talk about, we've given kind of a brief consideration of current uses in industry. Let's talk about student use of AI. So if businesses aren't using ChatGPT, who is? Here's where we're going to get into some market information. Now, Google Trends is a tool you all have available to you. All you have to do is go to Google and you can pull up Google Trends. And what this is it's measuring and tracking search terms, the times people have searched for a term in Google. Now, a lot of people use Google instead of typing in a URL or saving something in their history. So this is an imperfect measure of use, but it's a pretty good indication of trends and of use, okay? So what I've got here, the blue is ChatGPT. And we're starting February 2022, and no one was searching for it until it started really being introduced, right? And then we see very quick adoption of ChatGPT, and then we see it growing and increasing. I've overlaid the search terms for ChatGPT with those for Quizlet. Here's why. Quizlet has been at times the bane of my existence, and Quizlet is a company specifically marketing its products to students. Students use Quizlet. Business people don't use Quizlet. Quizlet is a product for students that has been used for cheating, guys. It's been used for cheating from time to time. It's also been used for folks who legitimately want to practice and study for tests, so I don't want to malign it too much. But since it is specifically directed at students, it's going to have a pattern reflective of the school year. So what we're seeing here, this first dip here, that's Thanksgiving break. And this second dip here is Christmas break. And then you see use go up, and then you see it sort of flatten out here during summer break. And then you see it go up, and then you see Thanksgiving and Christmas, and you see these increases. Okay. Do you notice anything about the pattern for Quizlet relative to ChatGPT? Yeah, same pattern, right? We're seeing the use pattern follows the same trend as Quizlet. Got one more here to add. Chegg. Okay, Chegg has a much smaller market share than Quizlet, so it doesn't show up very much when we look at just the two together. This is Chegg here in the blue. This is Quizlet. So I blew up just Chegg so we could see, and you see that familiar pattern with Chegg. Chegg is also the bane of my existence. Chegg is another site directed at students that has been used ostensibly for cheating in the past. Okay. Now, by contrast, if we look at the pattern for Wikipedia, I just wanted to give you a different pattern to compare. This is the pattern for Wikipedia. Pretty flat. So it's being used differently. Okay. All right. So this would suggest, now ChatGPT doesn't share their user data. It's proprietary. They don't share exactly who their users are, but I have heard unverified information that students are their main users. When we look at asking students if you've used it, polling data also confirms that students are using it and that the use of ChatGPT is increasing by teens. This is Pew Research Center, and from 2023 to 2024, they saw a doubling in students who had used ChatGPT for homework, for schoolwork. We also see an increase from 2023 to 2024. 79% of teens have heard of ChatGPT, up from 2023. Now this is, this number, I think, in some ways probably understates what we see at college, because we're talking about 13 to 17-year-olds, whereas in college the numbers may be even greater. Okay. All right, so another quick mini quiz. So, based on current trends, the evidence suggests that 1, students are just a small portion of ChatGPT users. 2, students are rejecting ChatGPT because it's inaccurate. 3, students are using ChatGPT increasingly often for schoolwork. And 4, searches for the ChatGPT site skyrocket during Christmas when shoppers are online the most. 1, 2, 3. All right. I see lots of 3s. We're all paying attention. Okay. So this brings me back to this question of learning. We started with the question of learning, and I want to come back to this question of learning. And learning, whether students are going to learn from this tool or not, is going to depend on how they use it. There's no question that there are ways it can enhance learning. I'm going to give you a few examples from people in my life who've used it in ways that enhanced their learning, that enhanced their performance. So I have a friend who got her degree in computer science, and she was on the job and had to do a different kind of coding that she hadn't done for years, and used ChatGPT to remind her, oh yeah, here's how I do that coding. Okay? Great use of ChatGPT. My younger brother teaches chemistry at Purdue, and most of his students are graduate students, and they're studying chemistry, and he asked them to use ChatGPT for coding because his class is chemistry, not coding, right? So that allowed them to do more sophisticated work in chemistry because they didn't have to go and also learn this coding to be able to do it. So the fantastic uses of AI that enhance learning. I think a lot of us recognize from our own use, I know from my own use, that it can be used to satisfy an intellectual curiosity in ways that are positive. You just have to be aware that it might give you some errors and check all those sources carefully, because it messes up a lot. So, there are no question that there are ways that this could potentially enhance learning. But we also need to be mindful of the possibility that it could reduce learning. Okay? Cognitive offloading, right? Remember that when we offload cognition, we lose our ability to do those original tasks. Okay. So there have been a couple of studies I'm going to talk about specifically that get at a little bit more, when is it causing problems? When is an AI tool actually reducing learning? The first study was a study in Turkey. It was a field experiment. And this had to do with the question, often there's a question of, well, if we develop these tutoring, whether to use ChatGPT or ChatGPT Tutor. Okay, so that was this was a field experiment in Turkey with high school aged students. It was a pretty big sample. They had two different tools that the students were taught the regular way, because it would be unethical not to teach them the regular way if we're not sure what's happening, right? So they were taught the regular way. That was the first step of this study. In the second step, they broke the groups into one or another treatment condition, okay? So one group used regular old ChatGPT any way they like to try to prepare for and study for. This was the preparation, the study period, where they were preparing for a quiz they would later take without any help. Right? Like imagine a paper and pen test with no closed book, closed notes, paper and pen test, right? All right, so that was the first condition, use ChatGPT any way you want. The second condition was something that they had created, a GPT tutor. And this was specifically instructed not to give them the answer. So it's like, we will not give you the answer, right? So that was the second condition. So now we can compare between these two things. One is a tutoring program with guardrails, essentially, versus, hey, go ahead and use it however you want. And what they found, and they controlled for things like who was what prior work on their classes, socioeconomic status, all of these other really important demographic variables were considered, and they found a 17% reduction in performance for those who used just the regular ChatGPT to study for that test without any other assistance. Okay? A more recent study, a pilot study, a lot of this work is very recent because it takes a while for things to work its way through the peer review process. But this was a fairly recent one that was done by at Duke University. This one I think is really the best indication because it's experimental, so we can identify causal agents better with experimental research. So this was an experiment that looked at learning outcomes, and learning outcomes were assessed based on performance on a multiple choice test. So they were given a multiple choice test in the end, and that was the outcome, that was the result. All of the participants were college educated, and they were given an article to read, and then they were given either, there were three different conditions here. They were given a manual condition where you were not allowed to use any technology. You got the article, you wrote up your essay, right? The next one was you can use generative AI however you want. And the third one was a chatbot that was offered individualized custom learning, right? So it was supposed to respond to the participants' questions and needs and prompt them to ask the right questions. So that was the third treatment condition. So we have manual, AI, and active. Okay. And in this case, they wrote a short essay or a short summary. In these cases, they didn't write a summary. Okay, so this is, you manually read an article and yourself write a summary. These are ones where you use AI as a tool for learning. The results of the test were that 67%, or about 67%, the average was about 67% in the manual condition, 48% for the AI treatment, and then fairly similar here for the active. But here's what's, when we look at the average, but here's what's really interesting about this active, and this is something that a lot of us have been feeling intuitively, which is that people with more education, those were the ones who made the best use of that. This comes back to prior knowledge, right? Those who had the best studies, best skills already for how to study, how to make use of that, were the ones above the line, right? Who tended to have more education. Okay, so AI reliance reduced critical thinking, and those two big takeaways from this: AI reliance reduced critical thinking, and those with the most prior education benefited the most. Now, this was a one-off thing. But the results here do really raise concerns about how we implement AI and when we should implement it and how we should integrate it into learning. Okay. Finally, I do just need to remember, I want to remember and remind you all, this is a business. This tool was not designed for your education. It was designed to beat the Turing test. You know, it was designed to pretend to be a human and beat the Turing test. Now they're trying to figure out how to make money off of it. Okay? And right now, there has been an absolute, up to now, this is not 2023, this is even before 2024, 2025, in the United States saw investments reach $62.7 billion. Now I get blurry-eyed over big numbers, but that's an awfully big number. ChatGPT loses money, not just on every single free search, but on every single paid search. They lose about $5 billion, not million, $billion a year. And investors are not excited about that. There have been some indications that investors are starting to pull out of AI. Just the other day, I saw that Microsoft had canceled a whole bunch of data centers. There are a lot of people who think, or some people, starting to think maybe this is a bubble. What happens if the bubble bursts? What happens if this is unsustainable and we've created a dependency? How will students fare when the tool becomes more expensive, when it becomes unavailable, or when it's loaded with a whole bunch of advertising that's embedded in it? What kind of a tool will it be for us then? Okay. I want to come back again to learning, because that's where I started, and to a kind of, I suppose the topic was supposed to be happiness, so I suppose I'll get there by way of harm. I want to think about learning, care, and harm in an AI era. What does it mean? What kind of harms should we be concerned about? What kind of care should we be concerned about? I think that students deserve a full educational experience. I think that we have to be very careful to protect students from harm, even if that harm is self-inflicted. And as I teach in my lifespan psychology class, a lot of my students are surprised to discover that abuse is not the only kind of harm that harms children. Neglect also harms children, sometimes just as dramatically. So we need to be mindful of this. There are a number of studies that have shown that having a stimulating environment, having mental challenges, studies with mice up here, offer a number of cognitive benefits. That they create more hippocampal activity, and that's a part of our brain that we use for memory, more neural connections. They reinforce brain plasticity. Using our brain actively reinforces brain plasticity, which means we're likely to be able to function longer, even in the face of something tragic like Alzheimer's. These are important benefits. So this is a lot. We have a lot at stake in deciding what we do with AI and how we implement AI. So I'll come back to my original question about human learning. And I'm going to answer not just yes, but I'm going to give you the because. Human learning matters because we need to foster human capital. It matters because learning provides a number of psychosocial benefits. In identifying one's interests, experiencing curiosity, building mental capacity, expressing a creative, I like to teach my students a creative analytical idea, fostering humility, building self-esteem through one's own individual accomplishments, and recognizing the intrinsic value of our own minds. So I'll end with a quick story about myself. When I was in high school, I missed an entire year of high school, came back, and had one of the most turbulent years of my life. I moved out of my I moved out on my own during high school. I was working. I was not spending much time in school. Had no idea, no direction, didn't know where I was going to go. And somehow I got just the right intervention at the right time and got sent off to Western, where I started college. And I struggled when I first started. I struggled with study skills. I struggled with time management. I struggled to find a major. I took a class in physics for liberal arts majors. I got an A- and thought, okay, I'll be a physics major. Took astronomy, got a C- and thought, maybe not. So I changed majors just about every quarter. And with these struggles, I learned more and more about myself. So when I look back on college in hindsight, I think about two of the most meaningful things I've learned, and one has been practical. One was I learned how to write a research paper. That has been a practical skill that I've used. The skills of doing that are skills I've used in business communications. I've used to write a proposal for a job for me and got it. Okay? Practical skills. But when I think about the most valuable thing that I learned in college, it was that I learned to value my own mind. And that's what I hope all of my students and all of you will learn to value. Thanks.